Reaching the 6-month release cycle, Wayland becomes reality in Cinnamon, and the team admits they spend more time releasing than actually developing. If you use Mint, this changes everything. In this video, I'm analysing the latest monthly news from the official Linux Mint blog, and I'm telling you, these are the biggest changes in the project's history. Linux Mint 22.3 and why it was worth the wait. Revolutionary support for multilingual keyboards, completely revamped user administration with home encryption after installation, and a new screensaver bringing complete Wayland support to Cinnamon. If you want to find out what all this means for you, stay until the end. Let's start with Linux Mint 22.3, the most recent stable version. This was a very successful release, even though it came a bit later than many users anticipated. But you know what they say? Good things take time, and that's exactly what happened here. The beta phase for this version was longer than usual, but this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The extended testing period allowed the developers to gather valuable feedback from the community, identify and fix a bunch of issues before the final release, and perhaps most importantly, review some of the decisions made during development. 2 areas received special attention following feedback from the beta period. The new Cinnamon menu and keyboard layout configuration for input methods. This is an area that might seem technical to some, but it makes a huge difference for users who write in multiple languages, especially languages that use non-Latin alphabets or complex writing systems. Work on improving input methods continues actively in the Linux Mint team. Recently, the developers discovered a use case they hadn't initially anticipated, but which is extremely relevant for multilingual users. Let me give you a concrete example that makes everything clearer. The team spoke with a user who writes in both French and Japanese. This user has multiple computers with different physical keyboards. Some have ISO French layout, others have Japanese layout. But here's what's interesting. He doesn't care about the physical keyboard layout. All he wants is for the logical layout to be French when writing in French and Japanese when using MOSC, a popular input method for the Japanese language. The idea is that you want to focus on what you're writing, not on where the keys are physically located on the keyboard. This wasn't a scenario the team had anticipated when they developed the initial configuration system, but they're now actively working to support it. The solution they're developing is the ability to set a specific keyboard layout when configuring an input method. This flexibility will make life much easier for multilingual users. Now let's move on to a major change coming in the next version that affects how we manage user accounts. There's a problem in the Linux ecosystem that many probably don't realize. Most Linux desktop environments have developed their own tools for user administration and account details. The problem is that this is actually an area that should belong to distributions, not desktop environments. And here's why. These desktop tools cannot and do not properly handle all the use cases specific to each distribution. As a result, many of these tools lack support for new and important features and, worse, are not well maintained. Linux Mint has decided to solve this problem the way it knows best, by developing its own solution. In the next version, the administration tool will completely take over user management and account details in additions where the desktop tools can be hidden. But it's not just a change for the sake of change. The new solution comes with significant improvements. User management in administration tool focuses on the most common and important tasks. Once an administrator creates a user account, that user can set their own password and finalize the account without needing administrator intervention. It's more secure and more practical. Home directory encryption is a massive improvement. Until now, if you wanted to encrypt a user's home directory, you had to do it during operating system installation. If you didn't do it, then tough luck. You had to reinstall everything or perform complex technical gymnastics. Now, home directory encryption will be fully supported when creating new user accounts anytime after installation. Want to add a new user 6 months later and want their data encrypted? No problem. Check a box and you're done. When you take an avatar using the webcam, what the application humorously calls a selfie, you can now see yourself in preview before taking the picture. Seems like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in user experience. Plus, you can decide whether you want to mirror the webcam image or not. No more guessing what the final result will look like. High DPI support for avatars. If you have a modern, high-resolution monitor, Avatars will look crisp and clear, not pixelated and ugly. Attention to detail matters. And now we come to the biggest and most interesting change coming to Linux Mint, a completely new screensaver and full Wayland support. The Cinnamon screensaver in its current form only works on X11. It's a standalone, separate application that runs in its own process and uses the GTK toolkit. X11, the old and reliable display server, is responsible for ensuring the screensaver sits on top of Cinnamon's window manager and hides all windows when the screen is locked. This system works, but has limitations, especially when it comes to Wayland, the new display protocol that's slowly but surely replacing X11 in the Linux world. One of the major goals for the next Linux Mint version is implementing a completely new screensaver that will have 3 fundamental characteristics. First, it will replace the existing screensaver. It won't be an alternative option, it will be the new standard. Second, it will work on both Wayland and X11, complete compatibility with both display protocols. Third, it will be natively rendered by Cinnamon's window manager. It will no longer be a separate application trying to integrate, it will be an integral part of Cinnamon. The benefits of this change are significant and worth detailing. When you lock the screen, the transition will be much smoother, without any delay or visual shock. Everything will flow naturally. The screensaver will use the same toolkit as the one used for the panel, menus, and applets. This means everything will look coherent, as if made by the same hand, because, well, it will be. This new screensaver is literally the last missing piece for Cinnamon to fully support Wayland. Once it's ready, Cinnamon will be able to run natively on Wayland without any major limitations. Clem, the project leader, humorously mentions that he's not showing us screenshots yet until everything is ready. But the fact that this is one of the big things they're working on right now shows how serious the team is about this transition. Until now, Wayland support in Cinnamon has been labelled as experimental. And for good reason. Essential pieces of the puzzle were missing, like this screensaver I just discussed. Once all the pieces are in place, Linux Mint will be able to officially support Wayland and start seriously testing it as a potential solution for mainstream users. But, and this is a big and important but, the Linux Mint team is very clear about their philosophy. They openly acknowledge that there are both advantages and disadvantages to X11 and Wayland. They're not fanatics of one technology or another. They want to support both display protocols because their users are different and have different needs. Supporting Wayland doesn't automatically mean Linux Mint will start using it by default. It means it becomes a viable possibility, a real option that users can choose. And when it comes to defaults, the team will always use what works best for most users. If Wayland proves better for most use cases, then yes, it could become the default. If not, they'll stick with X11. It's a pragmatic, user-centered approach that defines Linux Mint. And now we come to probably the biggest and most interesting strategic change that Linux Mint is contemplating. And this has nothing to do with code or features, but with the fundamental way the project operates. Clem makes an interesting reflection about the last 10 years and the projects Linux Mint has invested massive resources in. He identifies 2 main strengths that have made Linux Mint what it is today. First strength, incremental and slow change. Yes, they introduce changes, and sometimes these changes annoy some users. But they do it in a way that doesn't radically affect the project's identity or the fundamental user experience it provides. They don't make revolutions, they make evolutions. And that's an enormous strength in an open source world where many projects change dramatically from one version to another, confusing and frustrating loyal users. Second strength, independence and courage to develop their own solutions. And they've made some truly bold moves over the years. They stuck with LTS. While many distributions were debating release cycles and new versions every 6 months, Linux Mint chose the stability of Ubuntu LTS base. They rejected Snap. When Canonical started aggressively pushing Snap packages, Linux Mint said no, loud and clear, offering alternatives. They developed alternatives to GNOME. When GNOME 3 radically changed the desktop experience and many users felt alienated, Linux Mint did something incredible. They developed Cinnamon, a complete desktop environment from scratch. These decisions weren't easy to make. Some of them cost an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources to implement. But looking back, Clem says they were essential. But here's the problem. Whether they're distributing software, as in the case of the KDE edition, or actively developing their own solutions, as in the case of XApp and Cinnamon, Linux Mint spends an enormous amount of time on release management. Releasing versions frequently is important because it means they get a lot of feedback and bug reports when they introduce changes. They follow the same process over and over. It's a process that works very well and produces incremental improvements from release to release. But it consumes an enormous amount of time and limits ambitions when it comes to actual development. Think about it. With a release every 6 months, plus LMDE, the team spends more time testing, fixing bugs, and releasing versions than actually developing new features and major improvements. And that's why the team is seriously thinking about a fundamental change, adopting a longer development cycle. Clem mentions that the next version will be based on a new Ubuntu LTS, which means it's a perfect time to make this transition. And, in an amusing coincidence, they've just run out of code names for future versions. Although the version naming strategy doesn't matter much in itself, it's a clear signal that they're thinking about a fundamental restructuring of how development cycles work. What would a longer cycle mean? Well, instead of releasing a new version every 6 months, they could move to a 1-year cycle or even longer. Of course, there are potential disadvantages. Users would have to wait longer for new features, the feedback loop becomes slower, but the Linux Mint team will carefully analyse all of this. So what should we take away from all this? Linux Mint 22.3 was a solid success that demonstrated the value of a longer beta period. The improvements to input methods show that the team listens to users and solves real problems. The new user administration brings much-needed features, such as home directory encryption when creating accounts. But most interesting is what's coming in the future. A completely new screensaver that will bring full Wayland support to Cinnamon, and a possible fundamental change in how Linux Mint operates as a project by adopting a longer development cycle. All of this demonstrates that Linux Mint remains a vibrant, innovative, and user-centered project. They're not afraid to make big changes when necessary, but they do it carefully and thoughtfully, without sacrificing the stability and user experience that made them so popular. Stay tuned for more news. I'll keep you updated with everything new in the Linux Mint world. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. See you in the next episode.